Hi everyone, I'm Robin Wilhoit and welcome to our first streaming episode of Behind the Headline. We are so happy that you are taking time to be with us to let me explain what we're going to do. We're going to be taking deep dives into stories that had a profound impact on East Tennessee, in many cases beyond East Tennessee. These are stories that inspired us, informed us, educated us, angered us, you name it. In addition to doing that, we're also going to be pulling the curtain behind the storytelling process, talking to the reporters, the photographers, the editors, the producers who had a part in telling the story, and in turn showing you the editorial process along the way. So with that, let's get started. We're going to roll the clock back to April 6th. 1997. Just to give you a personal story here, at that time I was the morning anchor here at WBIR, and we would hit the air at 6 o'clock. But before that, one of my job duties was to call the dispatches around East Tennessee, the law enforcement agencies, to see if anything had happened overnight. On that particular morning, I called the Greene County Dispatch, and the person who answered the call said, "You need to get a camera crew here quickly. A family has been found shot on the side of the road, left for dead." This is the story that we aired that night of the Lillelid murders.
And they're animals.
Ken Bailey has lived in Baileyton all his life.
You just can't imagine what kind of people these were that would shoot two children.
He's been down this road many times before. The same road where a man, a woman, and two children were shot.
They were found in this ditch. The first investigator on the scene said when he arrived, he saw a man and a woman. Both were shot several times, and each was holding on to a child.
I understand that they had the children in their arms when they found them.
The adults both died. The children were still breathing, but both had been shot in the head. They were rushed to UT Hospital, where the 5-year-old girl later died. A 3-year-old boy is still critical.
The only motive at this time that we can establish would be robbery.
But if the motive was robbery, Bailey wonders why hurt the children.
Probably there's more to it than robbery.
Investigators say they have one good lead, a blue Chevy Citation that was left at the crime scene. It's registered to a woman in Paintsville, Kentucky, who says she lent it to two teenagers over the weekend and hasn't seen it since. Investigators from Greene County and the TBI are now heading to Paintsville, hoping they'll find clues to lead them to the killer.
We'd like to get it solved. I'd like to see them hang them from the nearest tree.
And the sooner whoever did this is caught,
it's vicious.
The sooner residents like Ken Bailey will be able to move on. In Greene County, Krista Goldhair, Action 10 News.
That little boy, Peter, survived. It was days later that 6 suspects, young suspects, were arrested, caught as they were trying to go into Mexico, and they eventually came back to East Tennessee. And with that, I want to welcome my guest. I'm so excited to bring in Gina Stafford, who, longtime journalist with the Knoxville News-Sentinel, no longer in the business right now, but back then, just a force in telling stories in East Tennessee. And this is one story that really you owned in many respects. If you will, Gina, pick up where we left off. 6 young people caught. Give us a Reader Digest version, if you remember what that is, of the case leading up to, there was a custody battle for that little boy.
I had a similar experience as you described. Came in the day after the crime had occurred, and we also were told of this horrendous crime scene that had been found. We rushed to the press conference, and it wasn't, I don't think, until very late that day that we learned the connection of the family to Knoxville, because the crime, of course, had happened in Greenville. And the thing that I remember, just as a personal matter, was being in a rush to chase down all these details to try to find people who knew the victims and put together the story. And I was late leaving at work that night because there was so much to it. And I brought a printout of it home. And I said to my husband, I haven't even had the chance to really pay attention to this. Can you just read this story back to me? And as he did, I just broke down in tears, because the reality of it, I was allowing myself to process. The next week or two, was a blur of trying to find out where the suspects had fled to until, as you said, they were recovered trying to cross the border into Mexico. It was a day or two after that that they were brought back to the Greene County Courthouse and marched in, and there was not any fanfare around their return, and yet there was a massive crowd outside the courthouse in Greenville, angry, letting their anger at these suspects be known. They were held, process went on of charging them, but Peter, the lone survivor, of course, had been hospitalized and over the summer from April transferred to Patricia Neal for rehab, and his mother's family and his father's family, both of them were interested in adopting him and raising him, and they couldn't agree among themselves, you or us or you all, and so that ended up being a civil court proceeding in which a judge awarded custody to Peter's paternal aunt who lived in Stockholm. So he grew up in Sweden. The newspaper sent me to Stockholm about a week or two after he went home because the community was so invested in the story and was interested in what kind of a home environment and what kind of care was he going to get. And so we did a series of stories covering all those facets. And I always was so grateful to the family for their willingness to talk and their willingness to be candid with me and make time available for me and a photographer to kind of come and still sort of encroach on their lives even though they had left the U.S. and were trying to get back to normal. And also because of that, I did then, and to this day, I feel somewhat protective of my relationships with them because I worked really hard to think about the trust that they were instilling in me and to make sure that the decisions I made about the right way and in a sensitive way to cover the story was with their well-being in mind.
And to that point, you talk about East Tennessee being invested in that story. As a journalist, devoting so much time and attention to that and to these people and to that child, it's hard not for you to personally become invested. How did you keep that line, though, that journalistic line of, I have to tell a story. I cannot let my emotions get too caught up, especially in my storytelling.
Yeah, you do have to think. I've got a great deal of sympathy for the victims. It was hard, not to be really troubled by the suspects, but at the end of the day, I think you look at this as an opportunity when you do your best work to do justice to the family in telling their story, to telling it with sensitivity but also with honesty. And there may have been an occasion or two when I knew that maybe the next turn in the story was going to be really difficult, especially the court custody proceeding. That was very difficult. I know the families were trying to work everything out without animosity, but that was one of those where you walk a fine line and sometimes you're in an uncomfortable place with the things you're having to talk about.
Did you ever face any pushback, be it from the people who you're reporting on, the family members, even internally within the New Sentinel, your leadership? Was there ever discussions, debates, pushback in your coverage?
I did not really experience that. I feel like the victims' families were extraordinarily gracious, and because of that, I think they wanted to see justice. There was an interesting moment when they were asked to be at, I think it was a preliminary hearing, and went through certain legal motions there. And I was waiting outside the courtroom to just get a follow-up quote because my understanding was the family was heading to the airport to leave at that time. And took a long time to wait, and they saw me and waved, and they volunteered. They said the district attorney was telling us how they were going to proceed and said this case will qualify for the death penalty in Tennessee. We just want you to know that. And I think that the prosecutors saw it as, you know, this is the most heinous crime and we're going to get the most severe penalty. And what both families shared with me was that they said, well, you've a job to do and you do your job, but we don't want that. We don't care about that. Executing these people is not going to bring our loved ones back, but you do what you need to do.
These many years later, do you ever check out the suspects? They are still in jail. These many years later, will be there the rest of their lives, we assume. Is it something that you're ever curious to do what's going on out there? Because after that, they appeared in different types of publications and videos. So is that something that you just have put away? Or are you still curious as to how their lives are playing out behind bars?
I am a bit curious. And the closest that I got to sort of finding out was at the 1-year anniversary of their sentencing, and they had put 1 year behind them in prison. I went through the Tennessee prison system and asked to interview because I was going to try and follow up with all 6 of the suspects who were held in Tennessee institutions. And for whatever reason, the 3 males all declined to be interviewed. The 3 females accepted the invitation, and Tennessee had at that time only 1 prison for women. It was in Nashville, so I went and spoke to the 3 of them together, and they asked me how he was doing. And that...
how did you react to that?
I didn't quite know how to feel about that, you know?
Yeah.
Because part of me felt like I was skeptical. I thought this is manipulative. They want to be quoted with sympathetic kind of portrayal that they asked about his well-being. And I said to them, I think he's doing as well as he can be under the circumstances. You know, he's had therapy physically and emotionally. His parents, adoptive parents, feel that it's important to let him understand the circumstances that brought him to where they are. They knew that in Sweden there were such headlines that they were concerned that not become Peter's identity, like he's the boy that came here after his family was killed. So they had him, with the help of a therapist, kind of, and at the level as he aged, that it was appropriate to share information with him so that he fully understood that. So I told them, you know, so I think they're making an effort so that he'll be able to do as well as he can after. And that, but I was very skeptical of why they would ask, you know, for obvious reasons. And then you speak of some series, parts of the story gets revisited. There was a series 2 or 3 years later, and it was on a cable channel and part of a series all week that they were doing a focus on gun culture in America. And so the Monday episode maybe was looking at some high-profile crime, and the Tuesday one looking at you know, gun crimes in high schools and so on and so forth. And so one day's focus was on females and crime. And so someone had gone with a camera to go and talk to these same 3 female suspects. And they, you know, I was skeptical again. I found that they were being very performative on camber.
So you didn't see much of a difference between you talked to them and what you saw?
No, and they talked about, you know, how sorry they were and lots of tears and everything. And then I felt kind of angry because then one of them said, and we understand that he's really doing well and that he's getting therapy, and we're so glad to hear that. And I remember just, I felt so violated that I felt like they were trying to use that to sort of, I don't know, to rehabilitate their image or something. But it's, I think as a journalist, you're following the story and you want to get the facts and report the truth of what happened, but there are moments when you have to sort of make decisions, and when you assess and evaluate people's candor, and yeah, that I remember made me feel like, well, lesson learned, I will not share so much, because I felt like maybe they were trying to manipulate, and that felt like they did.
Absolutely. We're going to put a pause real quickly on our conversation. We'll pick it up in just a few minutes. But we do want to fast forward the calendar, if we will, to the year 2007. And we asked that question, how is Peter doing now, 10 years later? It took our cameras to Sweden to find out.
For many 11-year-olds, practicing piano is at once a treat and a chore. For Peter, it's no different. When he's not playing the piano, you might also find him reading a book,
high five,
playing with his dog Pepsi, or glued to his favorite computer game.
Age of Empire 3. That's very, very fun.
On the surface, Peter is a typical kid. But when you dig a bit deeper, you learn about his heartbreaking past.
There was 3 boys and 3 girls. Some, shot us. I don't know really why, but yes, that's what happened.
On a rural road in April of 1997, 6 Kentucky teenagers opened fire on the Lillelid family, killing Dad Vidar, Mom Delphina, and big sister Tabitha. 2-year-old Peter survived, losing an eye and most of his ability to walk.
Not only one person was dead, but 3 persons, and 1 seriously hurt.
Rondi and Ode Heyer, Peter's aunt and uncle, met the little boy for the first time in the hospital.
He was in a bed with all these instruments attached everywhere. So that was the first time I saw Peter. Yeah, I want to give him a life, to give him a new family.
10 years ago, Rondi and Ode moved Peter here to Sweden. They put distance and now time between Peter and his family's tragedy. But of course, they never forgot about it.
It's not maybe in the front line anymore. But of course, it's always in my mind. And you think about it maybe every day, but maybe not in the same way as I did when it happened.
For the Heyers, their pain was evident. For Peter, it was unspoken, but still there.
Yeah, he had memories. You have memories about sounds and smells maybe, and different memories you can put word on them.
To help him cope, the Heyers put together a book of photos for Peter, telling his life story. His parents are there, his big sister too, all leading to his new family and new life. Today, Peter is a happy child, learning English, a language he still struggles with, in his neighborhood school. There, his classmates know him and his past. The questions have long been answered, his injuries already explained.
No, it doesn't bother him so much. He's used to it.
He's full of life, quite good humor most of the time.
And it's this attitude, this life, this happy, well-adjusted boy who the Heyers want you to know and remember.
Yeah, I hope he can just keep on growing up and be able to deal with everything on his own and have a good life.
And as for the bad memories they do have, they're not tied to the people of East Tennessee.
I would say that 95% of all the people I met was very friendly and very helpful. So I have just good memories. There was a lot of helpful people in Knoxville.
I want them to know that we really appreciate that and that we really are thankful. And I'm still thinking about all these different people every day.
Even for Peter, the young boy at the heart of an unthinkable tragedy, there is always hope.
What do you think of America? Does it give you bad feelings when you think about it?
No. That's good. That's a good country, I guess.
So you would want to go back and maybe visit someday again?
Yes.
And of course, that was Brittany Bailey reporting from Sweden. We have Brittany Bailey live here in our studio. Longtime reporter, anchor here, took a break, came back. Thankfully, we're so happy. But Brittany, this was a whole new thing when you went in 2007. First of all, explain, how did that actually happen that you got to go over to cover Peter's story?
Right, I felt so honored to be able to go, first of all, because I wasn't here when the crimes actually happened. So again, this was 10 years later, but it was the 10th anniversary, and we wanted to catch up with Peter. Everybody remembers that famous video where he's sort of waving to the camera, right? I mean, this community fell in love with him. And so I think in the newsroom, there was an idea that came together as we need to go find him. But this was 2007. The internet wasn't quite what it was. Social media wasn't quite what it was. So I remember my news director coming to me and saying, hey, we would like you to go. And this was mainly just side note because I was our station's first ever backpack journalist, as we called it back then. A one-man band, as they used to say.
Does it all.
Yeah.
Does it all.
So basically, I'm doing the interviewing, the shooting, the writing, the editing, but also we were using smaller equipment. So that meant it was easier to send someone overseas, obviously. It's one person, smaller equipment, you could easily go. So he came to me and said, hey, if you can find them, track down the family and see if they're willing to talk, and they say yes, we'll send you. Well, of course, I'm going to do that.
How did you do that?
Well, it's so funny. In recent years, I have tried to remember exactly how it happened, and I truly can't. I think I had some files, and I remember sending some emails and trying to find phone numbers, and of course there's a language barrier, even though everyone over there pretty much speaks English. But I can't remember exactly how I connected, but it was eventually online via email, and we were emailing back and forth, and the family said, sure, we will welcome you over. And so we booked the ticket. And just another little side note, I had a very extremely bad case of the flu right before this. I remember having to go to the doctor and getting some B12 shots and everything because we were not going to lose this opportunity to go.
Absolutely, and an incredible opportunity to continue the story, as we keep saying, a story that captivated and enraged East Tennessee. You spent a lot of close time with Peter and his family. How did that impact you emotionally as, number one, a person, and then as a reporter? Because it's very personal when you're invited into someone's home. It's very personal. But yet you still have to remain objective. How did that play out for you?
That was tough. That was because I knew I was there to do a job, but I knew I had to be so, gracious to this family was so gracious to me, and I was so grateful for that, that they were letting me not only into their country, but into their home. I mean, I was going into Peter's bedroom and he was showing me, his Legos, and I remember he had a snake skin on the wall, and, all of these, fun things for a kid. And of course, I had lots of conversations prior to that with, he called them mom and dad, about how we should approach the interview, what would be okay to talk with Peter about, because the last thing I wanted to do was go and sort of drum up terrible memories or do something that would harm the situation in some way. But as Gina has said, they were so wonderful and welcoming and so open to talking about it. And they had shared with Peter throughout the years, age-appropriate things about what happened to him. So he had always known. I remember one of the things they showed me as well was a photo album they had put together of his life, his story and pictures. And so they always were very open with him. Of course, he had had therapy as well. And so we had some conversations. And I remember they took me to where there's a frozen pond, and he was out on the pond in his wheelchair. And there was a little coffee shop that we went to. We went to a place where you could fire your own glass. And I remember bringing home a couple of pieces of glass. They just wanted to share their lives with me, and I was so just stunned, really, I think, that they were willing to open up so much.
It is no easy task. We have to reiterate this. For one person to go and to do something of this magnitude, number one, physically, as you mentioned, equipment. You, one person, traveling across the pond with a load of equipment, but the preparation. How did you prepare yourself for this interview process to talk to the family and to Peter?
I think I did as much research as I could, because here at WBIR we had done a great job of covering the story. So I remember watching old stories, looking at videos, trying to read as much as I could, not only our outlet, but other outlets as well, so that I definitely went with knowledge. The trip did come together very quickly, by the way.
Like how quickly?
I mean, I think it was a couple of weeks, quite honestly. I mean, it was very quick. I think because we were staring down the deadline of the anniversary, and it took a minute to have everything come together and to book the travel. And by the way, this was my very first travel outside of the country, and I did it by myself and for work. Yeah, it was.
Wow.
So,
okay, that's
and
a lot.
I felt a lot of weight on my shoulders and a lot of pressure because I was still fairly a young journalist at the time, and I knew that this community was so deeply invested in this story that I felt like I really wanted to do a great job and make sure I was asking the right questions and getting the right video and telling the proper story.
One last question.
Yeah.
You have a long, wonderful career in journalism, not only here in East Tennessee, but around the country. Where does this story land in the significance, the impact on you personally as a journalist?
Honestly, like probably top 5. I think it would have been even more so had I been here through, the terrible crimes. But just knowing what this meant to this community and how people were talking about it years and years and years later. We're talking about coming up on almost 30 years, and people in this community still, all you have to say is the Lillelid name, and they know this story.
Absolutely. All right, Brittany, thank you for taking us back in time. We appreciate it. We are fast forwarding the calendar once again to the year 2022, and we asked that same question. How is Peter doing? Our cameras then took us to Stamford, Connecticut. Early one April morning 25 years ago, I was here at WBIR making calls to local sheriff's departments to see if anything newsworthy happened overnight. That's when a dispatcher in Greene County said to get a news crew there fast. A family was found shot. Only the little boy survived. The senseless murders of the Lillelids horrified East Tennessee, which then rallied around the toddler. Well, today, Peter Lillelid Hayer is 27 years old. We recently traveled to his home in Connecticut to hear his story of overcoming tragedy. Ordinary. That's how Peter describes his life as a 20-something. It's full, despite tremendous loss.
Quite frankly, few people have the courage or motivation, I should say, to ask why. But of course, that's what puts me apart from most other people. My story, that is.
His story begins on April 6, 1997. Then 2-year-old Peter, 6-year-old Tabitha, and their parents Vidar and Delphina Lillelid were heading home to Knoxville from a Jehovah's Witness workshop in Johnson City. They pulled into a rest stop in Greene County. A chance meeting with 6 young people from Kentucky, ranging in age from 20 to 14, proved deadly. They kidnapped the family, forced them to drive their van to a remote gravel road in order to steal it, lined them up along a ditch, and gunned them down. Peter, shot twice, was the sole survivor.
Of course, the doctors at the hospital who I had medical papers, actually, they write my name as John Doe, as of course they didn't know who I were at the start.
Do you remember what happened?
Not a single bit. Not a single bit.
2 days later, law enforcement tracked down the killers in the stolen van at the Arizona-Mexico border crossing. When they were brought back to Greene County, an angry mob was waiting. Vidar's sister, Rhonda Hayer, and her husband, Ode, traveled from Sweden to care for the toddler who had lost his eye and suffered permanent neurological damage. They returned home with Peter and eventually adopted him. In 2007, 10 years later, WBIR traveled overseas to see how Peter had adjusted to his new life. 4,000 miles from East Tennessee.
Give him a life, to give him a new family.
Never, he says, did his adoptive parents shield him from the tragic truth.
I've always known about it and always had age-appropriate information about it in a way. I have never been traumatized by the knowledge of it, as strange as it may sound, yes.
But Peter shares a jarring moment when he was 4 or 5, riding in a car when his father quickly swerved.
But apparently it made me absolutely inconsolable. And they suspected that it was some that was somehow related to what happened on that day in April.
25 years later, Peter chooses to look forward, not back. In 2019, Peter made the decision to move back to the United States. He eventually landed here in Stamford, Connecticut, where he works in the world of IT. And in 2020, another milestone. Peter got married.
I honestly feel very blessed to be a part of his story and to have a place in his life.
Peter and his wife, Caitlin, have settled into life together. Despite all he lost, he gives little thought to the crime or the criminals, now in their 40s, serving life sentences. Peter has nothing to say to them. His message is to the people of East Tennessee and beyond.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you did. It played out very well in the end, as good as it could have been, for sure.
Gina Stafford back with this, and the reason why we were able to make that trip to Connecticut to meet up with Peter was because of Gina, because Gina, you, after all these years, have kept in touch with Peter. We knew that, we reached out to you, put us in contact, so thank you for that. But bring us up to date. How is Peter today?
He's doing great. He's got an active social life. He lived in Brooklyn for a while. He is in the finance world and now settled down, as you know, happily married, living in Connecticut. Couldn't have possibly imagined 25, 30 years ago that would have worked out for him as well as it did. But he's very gracious, he's very open-hearted, he's got a wicked little sense of humor. I stand in awe that they were as kind and as open to having a relationship outside and after I was working on the story. They are very special people, and he's a great guy.
Talking about working on the story, looking back, hindsight, it's always 20/20. Is there anything you would have done differently in your coverage? Any other angle you would have done? Or no, this was the body of your work and this is the way it needed to be told?
You know, I feel like if you're being really tough critic, I should find something. But on the other hand, so much of it in periods would come so fast and so much. And I will have to say, I was fairly early in my career as a journalist then, and I had some great mentors and some great leadership at the News Sentinel, at the newsroom at that time, who I felt very much like they also were sensitive to. This was a unique story. This was not the kind of story they would be telling very often, and hopefully nothing like this happened again. But we all knew the rare nature of the story, and I felt like there was a lot of sensitivity in the newsroom to telling it the right way, and I had a lot of good help and guidance and leadership to make sure that happened. And you know, I learned a lot myself. Go with my instincts. Sometimes you just have to work as hard as you have to work because the time is not in your control. But I feel like it was a great honor for me to get to do the bulk of telling that story, because it was difficult, and yet people were gracious under the very difficult circumstances.
This is one last question, and a question I'm going to ask all of our guests, and that is, how did this story exemplify the responsibility, the power of local journalism?
You have people who live in the community, who work in the community, are telling the community's stories, and it was a national, and you know, I don't mean to overhype, international headline grabber, but the paternal side of the family were Europeans, were Scandinavians, and there were lots of headlines there, and there were lots of international journalists that would show up at big milestones along the way, certain court appearances, the funeral, which was intense. And you know, but they're not there to tell the day-to-day, some of the minutia of the prosecution proceeding, or, you know, the various considerations for the care and for the custody of Peter. And so, you know, lots of news organizations that have a big audience that's interested in the surface but not the depth, they come in and they get the most impactful milestone kind of events and cover it. But the difference in that and local journalists, again, are you live in the community and you know the community, and you go and you find the people that went to church with them or who were coworkers or colleagues, and you tell that story. And so for your community, they recognize themselves in these stories, and they recognize the sentiment that is coming through in the telling of these stories. People who were devastated by the loss of this family from their church community or their residential community. And I think for local news consumers, there's a lot of value in being able to see the stories that affect their lives told in a way that is real, and that they can see their community reflected.
Going deep, going deep. Gina Stafford, I cannot thank you enough for being here, sharing your story as well as Peter's story.
Thank you. It's an honor. I'm grateful and happy to see that the interest in his well-being continues.
And I have a feeling it will continue
I do too.
Here on out.
Thank you.
Gina, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us. We hope you'll join us for the next episode of Behind the Headline.